I'm joined now by News 24's Assistant Editor for Investigations, Pieter du Toit. Pieter, President Cyril Ramaphosa and various heads of African states embarked on this peace mission to Ukraine and to Russia. Obviously, President Ramaphosa starting this journey in Poland and then heading off to Ukraine. What can you tell me about where you are at the moment?
Charlene, I'm in Warsaw. I'm standing in front of the Polish Jewish Museum, which commemorates the death of millions of Polish Jews during the German occupation of Poland. And there's an enormous monument commemorating the death of the millions of Polish Jews. And if I just walk back here, you can see the museum behind me, which is the museum commemorating obviously the Holocaust, many camps, many death camps in Poland, including Auschwitz, which was the Germans' most significant and major death factory. So that's where I'm standing as I speak to you. Unfortunately, we never got further than Warsaw. If it wasn't for a bit of luck, we probably wouldn't have gotten further than Warsaw Airport. As you know, when we landed in Warsaw, the plane, the SA-8 charter plane, was detained at the airport by Polish authorities. And we were stuck on the plane for 26 hours, ourselves, around 10 journalists, and more than 120 members of the South African Police's Special Forces units, as well as the Presidential Protection Unit, because the South African authorities did not have the right permits in place to enter Poland. It was an absolute and complete disaster. And Charlene, I have to tell you that I've never experienced such a poorly planned and poorly executed trip such as this. The security personnel were supposed to have been deployed in both Ukraine and Russia ahead of the president's visits there. It never happened. So we're still in Warsaw and supposed to leave Warsaw on Sunday.
You wrote in a piece for News 24 today, Pieter, that basically it was a futile trip for you.
Exactly that. This trip would have cost the South African taxpayer millions and millions of rand. It costs, obviously, in operational time. It cost the South African Police Service quite a lot as well. Transporting specialist security people to Poland, Ukraine, and Russia, that did not happen. And because of poor planning, poor execution, poor logistics, and even worse leadership, I think, the plane landed in Warsaw. The security people never disembarked, and the president went on his international visits and trips to both Ukraine and Russia without the support of these security people. So it was a complete and utter waste. And I think heads should roll for this. There should be an investigation. And you know what was really striking about this whole escapade and fiasco, because that's what it was, Charlene, it was an absolute fiasco, was the poor leadership, the poor communication, the poor planning from the very beginning. We could see it as journalists. We spoke to officials in the presidency who tried to coax us and try to mollycoddle us and try to explain to us, this is what's happening, that's what's happening. In the end, almost no single thing that we were told ever happened or it was ever executed. We were told that we were departure times, disembarkation times, logistics planning, almost nothing was in place, almost nothing worked. The fact of the matter is that this mission, which was to support the president from the South African Police's point of view, was a failure.
Major General Wally Rode, in some video clips shared on social media, accusing Polish officials, of racism, and saying that these permits were in place. What can you tell us about that?
So it was very clear that after a good couple of hours of frustration, where Major General Wally Rode and his senior police leadership team was unable to convince the Poles to let the contingent disembark, he held an impromptu press conference at 11:30, I think it was, on Thursday night, Wednesday night. The days bleed into each other. I forget which night it was, and then accused the Poles of racism, which it's difficult to quantify or ascertain whether or not racism was involved. The Polish Ministry of Defense issued a formal statement saying that the South Africans did not have the correct permits, even though at least 3 planning meetings were held with the South Africans. They did not have the correct permits. They also carried dangerous materials, which is ostensibly a reference to weapons and weaponry. And the South African police have not issued a statement. The presidency have not issued a statement. I've asked for comment. both of them refused to give comment. So the only official record that we've got, or the only official story that we've got on the record, is that by Polish officials, and we're going to have to go with that. I was on the plane. They maintained that they had the right permits. We never saw them. Wally Ruede and his colleagues insisted that the right permits were offered, but there's nothing on the record. There's nothing official. We've only got the Poles' word and the Polish Ministry of Defence's word in this, Charlene.
I want to ask you a little bit more about these reports of missile strikes. So not long after the African leaders touched base on Ukrainian soil, these reports surfaced from Reuters and other international media houses that there was in fact a missile strike or an attack of some form, from Russia on Ukraine. What can you tell us about that?
Well, again, we are reliant on reports by Reuters, the international news agency, who said that there was a barrage of missiles launched at Kyiv whilst the African leaders were there. We understand that some of the African leaders, including the president, was forced to take shelter in a hotel's bomb shelter. But again, the contrasting and the contradictory messages coming from the presidency is a problem. The spokesperson said that he disputes the reports that there was or were missile attacks or explosions. The president said there was. So again, we don't know, because South African journalists did not travel with the president as initially planned. We are reliant on the president's communications team that on one side of the coin are very efficient in sending us heavily edited clips of the president, but on the other side of the coin they simply don't communicate movement or planning to us. So again, the South African public generally is in the dark about what happened on the strip, where the president was, whether his safety was in danger, and exactly what was said. We don't know. We weren't there. The South African public is in the dark.
From what you could follow, so I know, knowing you, and even though you weren't there, I know you still followed some of the events closely. What did you make of that press briefing and the comments from President Cyril Ramaphosa and Vladimir Zelenskyy afterwards?
Charlene, yes, we followed it on the BBC and other international news channels. So it was interesting to see the president. It would be very interesting to see how he responded to seeing Bucha, which is a town in the north, I think, of Ukraine, where mass murders took place. Russians accused of engaging in mass murders there. It would have been interesting to see his responses to that, but it was interesting to see Vladimir Zelensky's responses to the president, saying that they are simply not going to compromise to go to the negotiating table while Russian soldiers are still on Ukrainian territory, which I would argue is a sane and a sober point of departure. I think the president was found wanting. It sounded and looked like the president did not have an answer to Zelenskyy's statements and responses, especially when Zelenskyy invoked Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first democratic president, who said that you have to struggle and fight for freedom. And Zelenskyy used the ANC and the ANC's most significant leader ever against Ramaphosa. He had no answer for that. So it looked to me from a distance, again, looked like the president was certainly outplayed in that instance.
And so the heads of African states have now headed on to Russia. We understand that not long ago, we received word that they have made it to Russia.
They have. We'll see what they say. Obviously, South African foreign policy is much more aligned to Russia. I would expect the president to be very warm towards President Vladimir Putin of Russia. I would expect the president to be much more accommodating of President Putin, and I would expect the South African president to take a line much more aligned and closer to the Russian head of state than he did to the Ukrainian head of state.
So maybe just for our readers and viewers at home, what is South Africa's official position on this war?
Yes, officially we are non-aligned. We are neutral. We have not chosen sides. That is what we say on paper. But in practical terms, we are very clearly aligned with Russia, firmly in Russia's camp. The recent statements by both the president, senior government leaders, senior party leaders, all indicate that we are very much in support of Russia. That has not changed. We have not voted in favor of any resolution at the United Nations condemning this war. That's just a simple fact. There is very close relations between South Africa and Russia. We undertook joint military exercises recently. Senior cabinet ministers and military officials have been visiting Moscow and Pretoria. So that quite clearly indicates the closeness between the two countries. So officially, we are non-aligned and neutral, but in practical terms, and for all intents and purposes, as far as all our international allies are concerned, we are a great supporter of Russia.
Pieter, then, as we wrap this conversation, just your opinion on this trip. How successful will this be? Well, is this mission, does it have any hope of ending this conflict?
Look, Charlene, I think on one level, there are two legs to this trip. Obviously, the one is the absolute logistical nightmare mess that the president's security people were thrown into. I think it reveals the levels of ineptitude in government and state. It reveals the degree to which the South African authorities and government has lost the ability to plan a complicated mission like this. So that completely ties in with what's happening across government, what's happening at Eskom and various other government departments, transport, etc. There's no reason why to think that it would not permeate the military and the police. So that was an absolute disaster, waste of money, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. As far as the diplomatic effort is concerned, that remains to be seen. It's obviously clear that South Africa wants to position itself as some form of an international peace broker and or power broker. It wants to position itself as a bridge between East and West, I suppose, much more aligned to the East. But I don't think the South Africans and the African leaders will have any success in bringing Russia and Ukraine to the negotiating table. This conflict is literally far above their pay grade. And I think as far as my contacts in the international world of diplomacy is concerned, we are not being taken seriously. We don't have professional or serious diplomats. It was a good PR exercise for the president. But again, like I said, he looked outplayed when he appeared next to Vladimir Zelenskyy on Friday.